So listeners, pornography. Everyone has an opinion about it, but is there a correct one? Today we're talking about its impact on sex and relationships, where I interviewed PJ Livett, founder of rePHRASE. Just a word of warning, probably best you don't play this episode on loudspeakers. I'd recommend headphones. Enjoy!
Welcome to Safeguarding Redefined, a podcast by Cornerstone Safeguarding. We'll be exploring a range of topics from child protection to adult safeguarding and everything in between. Please note some of the topics we'll be discussing may be sensitive in nature and may trigger strong emotions.
Thank you for joining us today, PJ. Why do you think we need to talk about porn more?
Well, this is a massive subject, as you can imagine. So just a little bit of background from my experience in terms of what I'm going to share with you today. So I'm founder of rePHRASE, an organisation that provides healthy relationships and sex education without the awkwardness. Now, we work with a number of organisations across the country, particularly with young people, including schools, parents, teachers, youth groups, probation service, the police service and domestic abuse survivors. And this is fundamentally about safeguarding young people so they can be happy and safe when it comes to their own experience of sex and relationship. So ultimately, rePHRASE is about empowering young people to be critical thinkers, make informed choices and develop healthy relationship behaviours. And of course, this is all done without the awkwardness. So when it comes to subjects like porn, it is just one of those biggies. Lots of teachers don't like talking about it. And we're growing up, kids are growing up in a sexualized society in the digital age. So without a doubt, we need to address this subject. So it's not really a case of if a child will see porn, it's more about when they'll see it. And we know that technology has developed so much over the years, hasn't it? So, when we were growing up, you were probably only accessing it if you were brave enough to walk to the corner shop and tall enough to reach that top shelf. But, the kids now, they don't even know what the watershed is because it's just accessible through all their devices at any time in the day. And, that's why we need to talk about it. It's just sex is supposed to be a positive part of humanity. But unfortunately, we've got this negative narrative that's creeping in throughout all of society. And I kind of feel like porn's a bit like junk food of healthy relationships. So it's about counteracting those messages.
I think that's a really healthy way of looking at it, because if we really make it a taboo topic to talk about, then people are going to do it more in secret, which ironically is what people do with porn. So if we can actually make it more of a discussion and age appropriately, and as we'll bring up in this episode today, I think that's really helpful. What is the average age a person first sees pornographic material?
Well, according to the Children's Commission report in 2023, the average age is around 13, but we do know that kids as young as 7 and 8 are watching this, and often they're seeing it for the first time by accident. So it could be a pop-up ad, or it could be on someone else's phone in the playground. And ultimately, I think this is why I'm so passionate about it, is because we know that young children, particularly if they're looking at under the age of 11, it has a real detrimental effect to them in terms of their self-esteem as young adults. Creating high anxiety, depression. It also reduces the empathy. They're less able to connect with human relationships. And I mean, this amazing expression was around years ago, but I still say it today. Learning about sex from porn is like learning to drive by watching the Fast and Furious or Mario Kart. It is never, ever going to end well.
That is a really interesting way of putting it. And it's not real life. We spend a lot of time talking about online behaviors and internet safety, and we talk about saying that a lot of things you'll see on Instagram, that's not real life, and this is just another topic which is along the same lines, isn't it?
Absolutely.
13 is really young, and as you say, we do know that it could be accidental from a very young age, especially when as parents we can go, we need to have a little bit of a break here, have an iPad or go on a phone or something like that. But what are the consequences of watching porn from a young age? You mentioned a second ago about kind of like having not a very good image for themselves, low self-esteem. Are there any others?
Yeah, absolutely. So you imagine a child, young age, watching this stuff. They've got no frame of reference about what sex should be like or what bodies should look like naturally. So actually, they end up getting very distorted views about what sex and bodies are like based on what the laws and the rules of porn. So mainstream pornography can really impact sex relationships, body image, self-esteem. It can impact them negatively around their psychological and emotional, social development as well. And this also can lead to addictive behaviours, harmful behaviours. I did hear about the porn business model, which relies on something called the Coolidge effect. And that is basically this: there's a natural desire in us for sexual variety. So people are predisposed to seek out novelty, variety in their sexual experiences. So if you imagine a young child kind of getting that superficial fix of that oxytocin being released, or the adrenaline, or the dopamine hit, which is like a hit of cocaine, you can quickly see how by the time they're in their young teens, they're going to be really quite hooked on this material that's giving them this stimulation.
That's interesting. So we're diving into the area of neuroscience, aren't we? How
Yeah.
does it affect the brain? Because there are a lot of studies. We hear it for years saying that it's very damaging to you. What are the effects of porn on the brain?
Well, I kind of describe it to students as if you imagine walking across a field of grass and you keep walking the same route every day, you're going to create this kind of path. And that's what happens in your brain. So the more you watch something, it literally rewires your brain. So you get this kind of new pathway. So ultimately, when people are watching it, they are seeking more and more stimulation because they kind of get immune to it. And so it overpowers the brain's natural ability to have real sex in real life. And I've spoken to young men in their 20s, early 20s, who have, said that they're with someone they really, really like, they really fancy them, they adore them, love them. And yet when they're together and they're intimate, their bodies just don't work. They can't get an erection. So the reality is, we're talking to teenagers and young men in their 20s who are experiencing erectile dysfunction now. So it's no longer associated with being an old man's problem. It's literally a physical result of watching a lot of pornography.
Yes, there are so many adverts of it out there, and there's a number of influencers that have started doing these interviews about it. And when I was younger, it was always adverts for people who were older. But yes, I've seen recently that actually it's people in their late 20s and 30s who are focused on this kind of topic, which is it's fascinating that you've stated that actually there is a link there, and maybe the accessibility of porn, as you mentioned at the start here, is proving to be probably an influence on that, maybe.
Yeah, and it's really difficult because you've got, even for adults who may have a frame of reference when it comes to sex, they're still looking at all these hidden messages that porn are sending out. So we know from the NHS, porn would say real men last 40 minutes or more, but actually it's lots of edited clips. And the NHS say that actually an average man lasts for 5.5 minutes and maybe half an hour with foreplay included. So you can imagine like the pressure on that person thinking, well, this is how I have to behave in my relationship or my sexual encounter. And often for women to go, right, well, that's what I need to accept or tolerate to be a good lover and not be cancelled. So it's really, really impactful in a negative way for many people because they think that is what sex should be like.
So there is something, and you've just added to it there actually, which is the editing of videos and things that are uploaded online. That it's not real; it's completely
Yeah.
fake. So what is the reality for those who are on the other side of the camera?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? I think lots of people don't think about that side of it, but there's research being carried out by Culturally Framed, brilliant organisation, and they've identified that 88% of the most popular downloads involve scenes of violence against women. And that violence is so extreme that many women often leave within 3 months of working in the industry because of the damage done to their bodies. So there's lots of sexual scripts we see in porn, and it's often around aggression, dominant male with passive woman. And with that comes coercion, humiliation, physical aggression, acts of sexual violence, blah, 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 blah. So basically, you kind of think aggressive sex is not the same as passionate sex, but porn would have us believe otherwise. Sex, it's something you do with somebody, not necessarily to somebody. And it should involve both people feeling safe, seen, and secure at all times. So it's about that ongoing consent all the time. But you just don't see that because porn stars are often raring to go. You don't see reference to communication or contraception. So somebody watching it might think, right, well, I can have sex and I don't need to think about condoms. So actually, there's an indirect link there, and actually, will it result in potentially STIs being transmitted or an unplanned pregnancy? So fundamentally, I think my main message when I work with young people is about saying, look, porn isn't real sex, and just like cocaine isn't real energy, and alcohol isn't real courage, gambling isn't real investment.
You come up with some really great descriptions there. That last section there, actually stating the differences. We can be so kind of hooked on the thought that we can get an energy source from this. So, like, a lot of young people will drink energy drinks, but then it's not helpful. And we're constantly finding that we're battling that narrative where we're saying to young people, don't do this, do this. But the way you're actually bringing it across, the way you're describing it, is actually really, really helpful. Even myself, I'm pausing, going, "Oh, that's a really interesting point," and I know that can be invaluable for young people. Do you think that young people are receptive to the message you're teaching?
I think they are, and the feedback I get says they are, because I don't go in and lecture them or say no, and I think that's what they expect. So I go in there and actually talk about the facts, the reality. And so there is this kind of, let's just give you information, let's inform you about the reality so you can make choices for you. And these choices might be different. We're all going to be different in our relationships and our experiences, but at least if you've got that power, that knowledge, you can you can be a critical thinker, make choices. And ultimately, it's about them thinking, what is going to be the best for me? Because we're living in an instant culture, aren't we? We get instant takeaways and Netflix or instant TV, whatever it is. So it's almost got to that point where, well, sex is instant. So what happens therefore to how do you invest in a healthy relationship? How do you communicate effectively? How do you argue effectively? Because we all will. We're disagreeing, but it's like all those skills, and we're not given this toolkit when we're born, but somehow we're expecting young people to grow up knowing how to have these connections with other people. And the bottom line is, we as humans, we're wired to have connection, to be in relationship. We're always seeking for our tribe, aren't we? So actually, if they're getting that instant fix from porn, they're not learning really important basic skills about connecting and communicating, whether that's a romantic relationship, intimate relationship, or a work colleague. We have relationships every day of our lives to some degree. So I think it is really about just saying, look, know the reality, and here are some tools and skills that you can take away as you grow up into your relationships.
I was looking on social media the other day, and I find it frustrating when people do this. But there was a couple that was celebrating, I think it was their 25th anniversary, and they were like, "We've never had an argument in the whole of our relationship." Now, in my mind, like the safeguarding hat I've got, I'm going, "Well, there's an issue there."
Yeah.
It's like it's not one. It's saying that it's portraying arguing or disagreements as being something that is highly negative, but on the other side, you look at it, you go, well, one person's not telling the truth.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, somebody somewhere is not being honest, and that's just no way to have an honest or genuine relationship.
It's not. So let's look at more of a darker side of porn. And is there a link between sexual violence, sex trafficking, and sexual exploitation?
Yeah, so in terms of sexual violence, there are, as I've mentioned, sexual scripts seen in pornography often reflect themes of aggression or female objectification or male dominance. So, an example of this filtering into society, there was a trend on certain social media platforms that will remain nameless about how to spice up your vanilla sex life. And it was talking about strangulation. But the reality is, and this is what young people need to understand, is that you only need the pressure of a handshake to kill someone. It's like the equivalent of opening a can of Coke. So if someone restricts the airway on someone's throat, the consequences can be very, very quick. So within less than 7 seconds, that person might lose consciousness. And within 14 seconds, they could be having a seizure. 15 seconds, they might have bladder incontinence. 30 seconds, it's bowel incontinence. And then all deaths will happen between 1 and 1.5 minutes. So there is that harsh reality. On the other hand, there is damage that's done to the throat and airways that may not be seen for weeks, and then swelling takes place later. So women have died as a result of strangulation, but weeks after the incident. I read this brilliant quote from a neurosurgeon, Dr. Don Hilton, who says, "It is ludicrous to suppose that a sexually aroused porn-trained male will be able to safely grade the degree of compression he's exerting on the carotid arteries and the carotid body of the neck." So that's just the reality of it. And luckily, we've got something now called non-fatal strangulation suffocation law, and this became an offence in 2022. So ultimately, that is meaning that when someone historically might have gone, well, this was just sex gone wrong, and that was their plea, they can't now use that to get away with sexual violence. So things are progressing. But again, it's just really highlighting how dangerous it is to restrict anybody's airway, whether that's mouth or through the neck. And in terms of the sex trafficking element, there's a massive link between sex trafficking and porn, much bigger issue than I think people might realise. So according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, pornography is actually the third most common form of sex trafficking after escort services and illicit massage businesses. So we know that anyone under the age of 18 who's involved in the commercial sex act, that is automatically qualified as sex trafficking. So with 94% of detected sex trafficking victims being women and girls, the bottom line is that pornography featuring women and girls is normalising sexual abuse, exploitation and violence against women. So it is a massive problem. And that kind of links to the exploitation generally. But I think now we've got another level with AI and deepfakes. So deepfakes, that's referring to a sexual or nude media created using AI. So it can represent the likeness of another individual without their consent. And an example of synthetic sexual content could include AI generated content that swaps someone's face with another person's nude body, or it can be the content that's generated using a nudification app. So that's when someone's clothed body is then changed to look nude. But the reality is absolute exploitation because it's non-consensual. It's a form of online sexual abuse, and it doesn't even work on the male naked form, which is interesting. So you could argue that actually this is solely targeted at objectifying women and girls. So basically another form of online misogyny.
It's disgusting how AI, which could be used, like most things, could be used for a force for good, is now just so shocking how we've known that things are going to come up over for a number of years now, but it hasn't been addressed properly, and then we end up with these apps that young people are able to have, and the shocking statistics of a few years ago was that a large percentage of imagery, category A to C, was generally taken by the actual children themselves between the ages of 3 to 7. Whereas you flip forward a couple of years, and now the majority of images are made by AI. And it is just horrendous where this is going. And it does worry me from just as a parent, not necessarily from safeguarding consultancy or anything like that, just as a parent, where this is going and the dangers of it. I mean, the video just the other day, and I know this isn't necessarily linked to our conversation here, but it was the one where there was a load of celebrities who were shouting out about Kanye West. Every single one of those people included in that video, it was all AI, but it was so believable. And and I found it very difficult. It used to be about a year and a half ago, you could tell whether or not it was AI because of the fingers, and you can tell with some distortion in the face. Now it's just become so clever that it is going to be very difficult to regulate this.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a challenge. Technology is great, isn't it, on the one hand, but it always brings challenges, and this is now linked to sex and exploitation. So, I mean, the good news is that the government is currently working towards the UK being the first country to criminalise AI-generated child sexual abuse images. So let's hope that comes through, because
Should be anyway. Yeah.
I think absolutely, yeah. It's just a new world, isn't it?
It is. And one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because we've been able to cover so many topics, and hard-hitting topics as well, is about getting that message out there. Because I find that when I've given training to people, especially, I mean, I say this in the nicest way possible, but some people go, we've never had any safeguarding concerns here, so we just do this training because we have to tick a box. I try and explore with my training to kind of just really get the message across that here's some statistics. Here's what's really happening in the world right now. And that's why these messages need to get out there, because I don't think people are really realizing the dangers. And when they say, well, when I was younger, it was never an issue. It was, you just didn't know it. You don't know what you don't know. I could go on for hours talking about these things. You got me on my soapbox now. But when you're teaching on this topic, do you cover the impact on relationships for those who watch porn?
Yeah, absolutely. Because interestingly, over my time working in this field, I've spoken to a number of couples, and we're talking about couples across the decades, up to their 60s. And it's really, it's apparent that the impact of porn does not discriminate. So actually, it's not about necessarily, a typical stereotype in someone's basement. It's literally impacting people. And often it's the partner of the viewer who's impacted significantly, and they are relating now to PTSD symptoms and real betrayal and hurt and distrust, low self-esteem. So it absolutely can. And there's been research to support this, where they've discovered that those watching porn actually have more struggles. So things like, if you're watching porn, you're going to be reminded more of potential sexual partners out there, or fantasizing about strangers rather than focusing on your real life partner. And in turn, that's led to cheating. It also can cause insecurities, low self-esteem and body image, and ultimately, therefore, reduces sexual satisfaction. Because if you feel like you're going to fail, why would you even want to try? Contrast to that, there's porn-free relationships, where they're shown to be stronger and include better communication, lower rates of infidelity, and couples experience much higher sexual satisfaction. So my theory around that is about intimacy, because actually if you break intimacy down into me see, it's all about really knowing someone and trusting them. And when you have that safety, sex is going to be so much better because you're going to feel that sense of connection.
That's fascinating. So how does someone know if they have an unhealthy porn habit, and what can people do if they want to stop?
That's a really good question. I had students ask this as well. So I think fundamentally you've got to really be self-aware. So do you find your thoughts, are they being interrupted? Your day, is it being interrupted, or are you distracted? Are you struggling to focus on something? Is it, when you're watching porn, is it moving from exploration to dependency? So, I came across a girl who couldn't sleep without watching it first. Is it actually medicating a lot of emotions? Are you processing trauma? Have you stopped seeing your friends or hanging out with people, giving up some of your hobbies? You're beginning to withdraw a bit from what you used to do. All these things could mean you've got this unhealthy habit developing. But the good news is you can rewire the brain again back the other way. And there have been psychologists and professors of behavioural addiction who have found that even quitting porn for a short time can actually lessen the negative effects and have positive effects on consumers. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. But I think the biggest thing is be brave and acknowledge what's going on. So self-awareness is key. Confide in someone you trust for accountability. And if you are that person and someone speaks to you about it, be privileged. This is so privileged. It is such a privilege, because if someone's confiding in you, they are trusting you, they're being vulnerable with you. So thank them for doing that. So yeah, confide in someone and then create a plan of action. So maybe it'll be filling your time with other activities that release that kind of dopamine hit, or hanging out with friends who keep busy. And then there's also seeking help from external organisations. There are a lot of organisations and professionals out there who can help. It doesn't really matter in terms of your age, but there are young people, and there are a number of specific links which I will make sure I share with you, and then you can put them out there to your listeners. And there's some for over 18s as well. But yeah, whether it's non-consensual intimate image sharing, or whether it's revenge porn stuff, or you're young and you're beginning to think your habit's getting out of control, there's lots and lots of help out there. So I shall make sure you get those links.
What an incredible discussion we've had today. There's so many things that I love about your approach. You do it in a non-judgmental way. What's really lovely is that you've said to us that, students approach you, which is great. And we know how hard it is when we're working in education or within any kind of charity youth group to get young people to be open and honest. So it's lovely to hear that they are with you. But also you mentioned there as well that it isn't just boys, it isn't just men who watch porn, it is across the board. All genders do. I know that some people can be forgiven for thinking that it is just a male heavy thing, but actually it is across the board as well. And there's so many topics we could cover in the future, and I think it'll be really lovely to get you back on the podcast again in the future. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much, PJ, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss an episode on Safeguarding Redefined. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Safeguarding Redefined. Remember, every voice matters. If you have a story to share or a question to ask, please let us know. To stay updated on the latest episodes and safeguarding news, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn, or check out cornerstonesafeguarding.co.uk.